Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Dear learners, I welcome you in this course, Research and Publication Ethics. Today, I will be discussing on the idea of violations of ethics in research and publication practices. My name is Dr. Nirbhay Kumar Mishra. I am an assistant professor at Institute of Applied Sciences and Humanities at GLA University, Mathura. Before we move further, let's try to understand what we did in the last lecture. So, we talked about the publication misconduct, we understood its definition, types and forms. Then further we analyzed this publication misconduct in the context of fabrication, falsification, plagiarism. Then we analyzed the major misconduct practices in publication, such as image manipulation, and we try to understand the misconduct in terms of the helicopter research. Okay, then we critically understood the causes, consequences and implications of misconduct in research practices. Then in the end we analyze case studies and try to ethically understand the what kind of misconducts are there, and then we try to understand what are the possible no misconduct strategies, or what are the possible precautions that a researcher can take for a good ethical publications. So after this session, learners will understand about the ethical violations in research practices. We will be discussing violations in the context of specific subject issues. We'll talk about the major violations in terms of fabrications, falsification and plagiarism, and we will try to understand the ethical violence in terms of the ethical values, ethical principles and the informed consent, subject rights, and we will try to understand what kind of violations are there in the publication ethics. So learners will understand of this session these all things in research and publication ethics. So let's try to understand what we simply means by ethical violations. So we understand that the idea of research community, okay, it's based on the established research principles, okay, that each researcher has to follow. Okay, when we violate any principle or we are not adhered with the principles, okay, then actually we commit that kind of violation. So ethical violation in research simply means not adhering to the ethical principles, values, duties, codes of research conduct or established guidelines for the conduction of research. Further, we can understand it is violating the rule of informed consent, autonomy, beneficence, and it's a non-maleficence and justice in research in general and clinical research in particular. So let's try to understand how we can avoid this kind of ethical violations. Okay, so we have to understand the idea of responsibility, novelty and utility in research ethics. Okay, so when we talk about the responsibility, okay, so researchers have got several responsibility. Okay, responsibility towards the subjects. Okay, responsibility towards the say can research community, okay, and responsibility towards the society, responsibility towards the environment also. So researchers have got several responsibility. Okay, first responsibility, that's the research community to follow ethical principles, okay, so that a researcher can avoid ethical violations, okay. So we need to understand, when you develop this kind of responsible attitude as a researcher, so you follow the ethical guidelines, and then you develop yourself as a a kind of integrity to the research practice, and then only you can avoid ethical violations. So responsibility is a very important aspect in the research ethics, so we need to understand, okay. Further we have to understand, okay, so after that let's try to understand the second important point after maintaining the responsibility, okay. Then let's talk about the second point, that is the novelty, okay. Novelty is also a very important factor for a researcher, okay. When you actually try to discover something new, you work on some new ideas, you try to develop something original and new, then actually avoid fabrication, falsification, plagiarism. So novelty is interestingly a very very genuine factor that should be presented in the researcher. So novelty, we should work for novelty. With the responsible research attitude, it develops a kind of novelty in the researcher. Then we have to understand the third point, which is also very important, that's the utility, okay. So utility means that what kind of responsible research you produce in terms of adding new informations, original information based on good research practices. They must be for the betterment of society. I mean, they must add maximum good to the society. So when you are concerned about the responsible attitude as a researcher, when you aimed at the novelty in your research, okay, and when you also think about the utility in society, then actually you give ethical shape to your research and to your research personality. Now let's try to understand what kind of research ethics we require in order to avoid, okay, to avoid this ethical violations. So first of all, we need to have certain ethical values, okay, in our research ethics. And what kind of values we are talking about here? The very first value, we must start with the informed consent, first of all, right? When you conduct a research, you must inform to your subjects each and every information, what kind of experiment you are going to take and conduct on. So informed consent is your first thing that you must mind, and then you must concerned about the privacy of the subject, okay, and confidentiality also in the research. That's also a very important thing. Confidentiality you maintain unless the research is published and it is open for public, okay, all the researchers for the research community, you have to maintain the confidentiality of the experiments and the peer review procedure, okay, the communication between the reviewer and author editor. It requires confidentiality as a value. And then you must also value the honesty. You must be honest with your experiment methods. You must not fabricate with any device, any kind of data manipulation should not be there. So you must mind the honesty, and you have to work for the beneficence of society, okay. So your research has a very stringent purpose, okay, to the beneficence of the common good or common people. And then you have to also take care of this autonomy of the subjects, okay. So your subject is not bound with you, okay. Subject must be informed consent to where you conduct your research, okay. So you must give the autonomy by informing each and every step, each and every information that you develop in research, okay. And you must give the freedom to subject, or whether to leave the leave the research also at some time, okay. When it comes to the case of especially when we talk about the medical researchers, clinical trials, drug testing. So we have to we have to care the autonomy of the subjects, okay. And we will be discussing one case study interestingly later in this discussion about the autonomy, okay. Then you have to follow the rules, okay. Rules maybe in terms of ethical rules, committee rules, regulations, international national protocols we have to follow, okay, like this. And then we have to work for the justice in terms of the proportionality of the benefit and risk involved in the research, okay, you must think about the justice. And yes, of course, you have to take care of the dignity of the subjects and dignity of the all stakeholders in the research community. So these are the basic values we have to follow in the research practice as a researcher. Let's move to understand further what kind of principles we have to we have to develop as a researcher, and we have to follow in our research practices to avoid ethical violations. Okay, so very first idea we talk about here is responsibility. Okay, we have to develop the responsibility in our in our research practices, responsibility to research community, responsibility to science and respecting the science, okay, its methods. Okay, so it simply means that when you respect the science, you respect the research community, you show the integrity, you show the honest, responsible behavior. Okay, you maintain that integrity in the research community. Okay, and then you understand the competence of the research. Okay, that you need to have a competence to conduct research. Okay, you must be trained in conducting certain experiments. Okay, so without competency you should not go ahead to to handle certain crucial researches. Okay, when we see the healthcare researchers, okay, medical researchers, they require very adequate competency. Okay, so then you have to understand that the principle of non-malfeasance, that you must think that your research is for the beneficence of the humanity. Okay, for the betterment of society, developing the quality of life, whether you are working as a researcher in the humanities or social sciences, especially if you are working in the in the medical sciences, biomedical researchers. Okay, you are working in the drug researchers, clinical trials. You must think about the non-malfeasance, that you must not harm the in the subjects, and your research must not harm at any cost to the society. Okay, and then you have to work for the beneficence, for the maximum good of society. And of course we have to take care of the autonomy of the subjects and the research community. Each stakeholder has a stake in the research. Okay, and they are given in terms of certain benefits, and they have certain risks involved in the research, so they must be properly informed, well informed, what kind of risks that experiment involves, what kind of benefits they have. Accordingly, there should be proportion in terms of involving research subjects. Okay, and we have to maintain the confidentiality in terms of the in terms of the private informations, okay, of the researchers. Okay, research subjects. Okay, those who involve like human subjects. Okay, we must not disclose that identity. Okay, we have to take care of their personal and private information, and we have to respect them. And that respect we have to understand in terms of when we conduct research, okay, on the vulnerable class, okay, or weak class, okay, and or on the patients. Okay, then we have to maintain these all principles for a good conduction of ethical research in order to violate any ethical principle or values. Let's try to understand. Okay, first of all, we have to understand the idea of research community, what it involves. It involves researcher, of course, it involves research subject, it involves the experiment design, okay, and all the devices and data that we use, and all the the research team members, in case co-authors, editors, reviewers, okay, all those who involved in the research practices and may have certain benefits, and they can have also certain risks. They all are the in the stakeholders of the research practice. Okay, and then there are the rights and responsibilities of each stakeholder in the research process. So we have to understand majorly ethical violations, they occur when we conduct experiments on certain people, like their patients, like animals, like when we are working as an experiment in environmental research on a site, okay, environmentally vulnerable site, okay, or when we conduct experiments on children, okay, or prisoners or pregnant women, or we are conducting experiment on mentally challenged people, or educationally and economically disadvantaged people. Okay, then we have to we have to be very concerned about the ethical principles and the values we should follow in our research conduction. Okay, and then when we can have the conflict of interest with the industries and corporations, where we supply the data, where we do some certain experiments for some kind of corporate practices. We have to mind the conflicts of interest. So these kind of research rights and responsibility and research ethics we have to understand as a fresh researcher very well before we go to conduct any kind of research. Then we have to understand in terms of research practices for the it involves the experiment, it involves the development of the devices or registering for any patent. That is when you write a manuscript and submit to the journal. So in terms of authorship, contributorship, conflict of in the researchers or conflicts of interest, a peer review process, editorial process, and journal publishing and publishing process. These all research practices, they involve a kind of following of ethical rules and principles and values that we have discussed so far. Now let's talk about the in terms of the research publication, what kind of ethics we have observed. So we have seen that latest development we have discussed also. It's we have been observing that there is a kind of culture that's the publish or Paris. There's a culture that's known as publish or Paris. This culture has caused another culture that we know, that's the pay and publish. So and then this has further caused it has given the advantage to the predatory publishers. So to make fool, it has given the advantage to the predatory publishers. So that they can have the easy targets, in terms of the fresh scholars, those who don't know about the predatory publication practices. So we have to understand that we have to follow certain ethics, and we have to refrain from ourselves from this kind of violation research practices. So publish or Paris, pay and publish, predatory publishing for the career enhancements, institutional promotion or branding or research based marketing. We see the several kind of ethical violations we observe in the research publication practice that we have to avoid. Now let's try to understand the specific cases. In especially in the laboratory medicine research, we see these ethical issues for research ethics committees. So very first thing that we see, violation of informed consent. Many times subject is not informed about the each and every step of the experiment, or some kind of samples taken from them, but they are not informed for what purposes that sample will be used for in the process. So research ethics committee has to look for this kind of violations in terms of informed consents, whether the subject from the sample has been taken were properly informed or not for the further uses of the sample in the research experimentation or not. Secondly, we have to understand that when we there's a storage of biological samples. So we have to understand what is the living sample, what is the non-living sample. There's a debate on this point, that whether blood sample is a living sample or non-living sample. So what kind of information subject should be given for this uses in the research experimentation about it. So there are many ethical issues that which needs careful handling by the research ethical committees. Then we have to understand who is the owner and who has the property rights for research developments, using the others samples also. So what kind of stakes are there from the subjects, and what kind of benefit they will be given in the research experimentation practices. So ownership and property rights we have to tackle very clearly. What is the ownership and what are the property rights? They should be well defined in the research laboratory. And they should be clearly informed to the subjects also. And when we take the sample more than the needed, and like in terms of the human tissues, in terms of the blood donation. So what kind of uses we are going to have in the research practice? That's also creates some kind of ethical ethical issues in the laboratory medicine researchers, okay. And then we have to understand what kind of material transfer, okay. When we transfer that kind of sample to the other country, okay, these kind of transfers are ethically permissible or not, okay. And then when we have to disclosure of research test, that subject and all the those who are involved in trial, okay, they must be informed about the any kind of any kind of malfunction in terms of the effect of medicine, effect of drug trial, or effect of any clinical trial on the patients, okay. And then when we use these all things for commercial research, okay, then what kind of stakes are there for the research subjects. So these are the several issues which arise in laboratory medicine, okay. And then of course we have to understand the idea of conflict of interest, okay. Conflict of interest between researcher and the financial institutions, those who grant, or any corporation or company involved, or any university project, okay, that funds, okay. And then again we have to understand if we are conducting that kind of research with the human subjects, okay, then what kind of conflict of interest may take place in the research. They are the several issues which needs a very careful ethical consideration by the research ethics committees. So when we analyze the whole literature, okay, on the misconduct, okay, and the misconduct in the researchers, scientific misconduct, publication misconduct, okay, ethical violations. So we find that these are the major issues which we observe in the research practices, okay, by the researchers, by the sometimes by the reviewers, editors, all the stakeholders in the research community. They these all research issues involve these all factors. So ethical violations may involving falsification, cases of falsification, fabrication, plagiarism, okay, and the self-plagiarism, conflict of interest in terms of the approvals from the ethical committees, regulatory authorities, and the consent, okay, also consent to the subjects, okay, and then in terms of the data manipulation, okay, data tampering in terms of peer review process. And we have discussed so far that editor and general publisher manipulation is also a major factor in terms of the violations of the ethical norms and rules and the principles for the good research conduction, okay. So these are the major issues so far we have discussed. They may involve the ethical violations, okay. Now we will move further to discuss several case studies to understand, okay, to what kind of violations been made in the history of research and publication ethics, okay, what kind of issues they emerged, okay, and what kind of changes we witnessed in the research publication history. Now we'll try to understand subject specific case studies and issues which have been occurred in the research and publication history by the researchers, okay. So let's take the first case that happened in 1998, okay. So one author, infamous case that who was connected with the Lancet paper, okay, linking autism with MMR vaccine, okay, measles, rubella vaccines, okay. So investigation happened for more than 2 years, okay, that ended in 2010. So the author found guilty of conflict of interest both as a recipient of money from lawyer looking for link to vaccine and regarding company he set up looking to market test, okay. So what kind of issue emerged in this case study that we need to understand, okay. So in this case it was found that there was highly selective reporting of data. Data was used purposefully to benefit the test and the company, okay. So here we see the violations in terms of the first of all the consent, informed consent to the subjects, okay, to whom the trial has been made, okay. And then we see the exploitation of the subject in terms, okay, of testing, okay. Then with the conduction of clinical trial, okay, on the children, okay. So in the end we find the conflict of interest, financial conflict of interest in this case. So these are the possible violations in the research ethics practices we need to understand, okay, very clearly. In our next case that occurred in 1999, okay, that's about the consent, clinical trials, and conflict of interest, okay. So this practitioner conducted clinical trial using gene therapy, okay, to combat, okay, a very rare genetic disorder, okay, and that was the OTC deficiency at University of Pennsylvania, okay, Pennsylvania, in which Jesse Gelsinger died. This was very popular case in the history of, clinical trials, because Gelsinger was the first person who died during the clinical trials, okay, and this is the first case involving the conflict of interest or financial conflict of interest on clinical trials, okay. So president and major shareholders in Geneva company developing product under test, okay. So Gelsinger, okay, died, okay. Then again, when the investigations report came out, okay, then it came that it failed to report extent of adverse reactions during animal testing. So what in this case happened actually? First, the consent was not properly taken. Okay, Gelsinger was not fully informed about the adverse effect of that medicine trialed on him. Okay, Gelsinger was not given the even the report of the 2 other patients who denied, who had the severe consequences of this trial medicine, and he was not even told that they tested on the monkeys who died during the experiments. Okay, so this was of course the case of denial of proper informed consent, and conduct of clinical trial was not properly undertaken in this case study, and there was of course financial conflict of interest, because that research financially involved the university and the James Wilson also in this case. So let's take our third case study, okay, Tuskegee syphilis study, okay, and that's very long experimentation on human subject trials, okay. It started in 1932 and goes long to 1972, okay. So it was tested on poor African American with advanced syphilis, okay. So they recruited to trial to study their bad blood, okay. So what happened ethically wrong in that doctors tested deliberately untreated, and then to see longer term effects of infection, okay, even when treatments became available, okay, penicillin was discovered and treatment was there, even they were not given this medication, to only see the severe consequences, long term effects of infection, okay. So over 400 men plus families involved in this case, okay, and that was typically breach of human rights, okay. So they did not care even that they are testing on the human subjects, okay. So that's really ethically inhuman sort of experimentation, I must say, okay. So that's the violation of consent, and it's a case of exploitation and also racism, because they have chosen specific subjects, okay, and they made them deprived of the medication which was available. So this is really a worst kind of ethical violation, I must say. So in the next case, okay, which occurred in 1940s, okay, with the Nazi doctors. So medical experiments conducted on prisoners, okay. We have discussed prisoners are really vulnerable classes, okay. So it's a case of sterilizations, okay, modeling of battlefield wounds and infection, physiological response to extreme conditions, okay, bizarre transplantations and twin studies, okay. So doctors included angel of death, okay, Joseph Mengele, okay, escaped, plus several trial, they were all hanged, okay, in this case. So in this case actually so the 2 major violations in terms of the consent and exploitations. In our next case we see that's also very interesting case, obstetrician at St. George, London, okay. So he reported transplant of ectopic pregnancy to uterus and live birth, okay. Colleagues at same hospital said no knowledge of case, okay. Peers tried to hack computer to alter notes, okay. Also found to have invented patients in study on polycystic ovary syndrome. Okay, even patient could not be traced properly, so and he was struck off by the General Medical Council. Okay, and that was this very clear case of fabrication, data fabrication in the research practices. So our next study, okay, involves celebrity psychologists, okay, appearing regularly on TV and radio, okay, including also, okay, in the Mind on R4, okay, and in his book From the Age of the Couch and various other writings, including article on Scientology, okay, so he admitted plagiarism but claimed it was accidental due to pressure of work. Okay, he was suspended for 3 months. So it was the case of plagiarism, okay, where he involved with copying the other's material without informing the resources. Okay, so in the next case, that's also very important organ scandal case, okay, in which a senior pathologist, okay, at Elder Hay Children's Hospital, okay, was expert in cord death, was found to have organs from about 850 children without appropriate permission. He was also struck off by General Medical Council, okay, along with the scandal at Bristol Royal. So our next case is about senior pathologist at Elder Hay Children's Hospital. He was expert in cord death, okay. He was found to have organs from about 850 children without appropriate permission, okay. Was struck off by General Medical Council, okay, along with the scandal at Bristol Royal Infirmary led to Human Tissue Act that was development in 2004, okay. So in this case we see clear-cut violations in terms of the consent from the research subjects, okay, and then we also see the violations in terms of the data fabrication. Now let's try to understand next study, and that's also a very interesting case, okay. It is regarding the authorship issues, okay. So in this case study, the corresponding author and the senior scientist on Hong paper, okay, University of Pittsburgh investigation found him innocent of fraud, but said he shirked his responsibility to validate results, okay. That was guilty of research misbehavior, not research misconduct. Here we have to see this conceptual difference, okay, in terms of research misconduct, okay. That's we have to understand research misconduct in terms that when you intentionally involved in kind of wrong research practice, while when we talk about the misbehavior, that's that you did not behave responsibly in the research practice, might have not the wrong intention, okay. Maybe you're honest, but you did not properly responsibly behave in the conduction of research, okay. As a as a co-author, you must have been responsible, okay. So this is the case of the irresponsible authorship. That's the kind of violation in the research practice. Further in this case, okay, that's also a very interesting case, okay, where you have to understand that ethical violation in terms of the research publication, and from the viewpoint of the fair peer reviewer process, okay, peer review process, we have to understand in this case one reviewer received a paper, okay, and he rejected. Later on he found submitting the paper with copying most of the things, okay, and the data, and then later the reviewer caught, okay, on the issues of plagiarism. He just copied most of the materials and he fabricate with the data also, okay. So it was a case of violation of peer review process also. So we have to understand that there are ethical violations at the level of peer review process also, and we have to avoid. As a peer reviewer, we have got certain responsibilities and duties we need to understand clearly, and we must regulate our behavior in terms of the research ethics. Now in our next case, it was again about the plagiarism and violation of peer review process. We see the case again, okay. So in this case, what we found that the research was done on aging, menopause, and hormone replacement therapy, okay, working primarily at University of Vermont, okay. So misconduct exposed by former lab technician Walter Danino, okay, who pleaded guilty to falsifying 17 grant applicants and fabricating data in 10 research papers. Okay, so it was the famous case in the research history because he was the first scientist, okay, Eric Feldman, who actually jailed for the fraud, okay, and also fined for this kind of ethical violation. So this was the case of the fabrication and the falsification. The next case is linked with the gift authorship. Okay, and there we have to understand the linked with the Malcolm Pierce case. Okay, a world-renowned ultrasound expert. Okay, Chamberlain was Pierce's head of department and editor of British Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Okay, where both fraudulent papers were published, accepted gift authorship for ectopic pregnancy paper. Okay, and that was reprimanded by General Medical Council. Okay, so later on it was interpreted as considerable error of judgment. Okay, so that's a case of gift authorship. Okay, when somebody is gifted the authorship, we have discussed in the last lecture that when researchers simply include the name of another researcher scholar who is very famous in the area of research, so to influence the publication. Okay, so to increase the success of the publication. Okay, so the next case is also very interesting. That's the fabrication with the research experimentation. Okay, so that's a case from the University of Michigan. Okay, one PhD student, okay, Heather Ames, struggled to get experiments to work in her own lab, but when she was conducting the experiments in her boyfriend's lab, they were giving the right results. Okay, so then she suspected, okay, the fellow, okay, and he thought that somebody is doing something. Okay, then she set up a concealed camera and caught another scholar adding ethanol to cell culture. Okay, so in April 2011 he pleaded guilty to destruction. Okay, and that's case of sabotaging, okay, the others research. Okay, and that's also the case of fabrication proved in kind of ethical violations in the research practice. So now let's try to understand. Okay, try to understand what is the possibility. Okay, how to avoid these ethical violations in the research practice, because that's really very difficult challenge for the researchers in the research community, and for all those who are at the stake, okay, in the research community. And okay, so all the research subjects, okay, on we conduct the research experiments. So let's talk about the Howard Sassman. Okay, so he's from University of California. So he beautifully describes perceptions of culture of science, the differing views of scientists and lawyers. Okay, so let's try to understand, because so far we have discussed, okay, ethical violations in terms of the research practices, okay, conduction of research, about the rights and responsibilities of research subjects. Okay, in terms of the publication process, we have discussed the issues of informed consent, data fabrication. We have discussed the issues of plagiarism. We have discussed the issues in terms of the authorship also. So now let's talk about how Howard Sassman, is from University of California, how he expressed his views on this kind of ethical violations in research practices. So he quotes, he describes perceptions of the culture of science, the differing views of scientists and lawyers over the definition of misconduct in science, and the requirement for courses on responsible conduct of research, while supporting the teaching of such courses and imposing sanctions for proven cases of fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. He emphasizes that unethical behavior cannot be eliminated completely. Okay, unquote. So, of course, it's very impossible to eliminate the unethical behavior, okay, ethical violations in research practice, and we have to understand the given the conditions prevailed in the history of research, the way technology has improvised and made it really easy to tamper with the data. And case of image manipulation, fabrication we see in the research practices, of course really impossible to eliminate the case, but still we have to understand there is a value of the research ethics courses. In a way, when a fresh researcher starts his or her research journey, then he or she must be trained ethically for the research and developments. Okay, it's not only important to to develop researchers, okay, but we have to understand it's also important to have the right kind of direction. It's also important to understand the idea of good in the researchers, and it's also important what are the responsibilities for researchers, and they must be trained in those responsibilities. And there we have to understand the roles of mentors, supervisors, okay, and the senior colleagues in the research practices to avoid this kind of ethical violations. So these are the strategies we have to understand and develop in the research community. So research community is not about only conducting researches, okay, developing technologies, okay, developing new methods, experimentation techniques, but there is a requirement of the understanding of research ethics and publication ethics. Okay, we need to involve this kind of courses and understanding, so to improvise these research practices and avoid ethical violations. So let's try to understand, okay, how actually we can avoid this kind of ethical violations. So let's try to understand, of course, that when we develop research practice, okay, it has a purpose. Okay, science has a purpose to first purpose is to express the facts and the reality the way it is found in nature, okay, and that's the maintaining the integrity with the reality also, okay. And then another purpose of science is to, of course, to improve the quality of human life, to facilitate with the technologies, equipment, software, machines, and the other methods to solve the many problems of the human life and society. So we need to understand that of course our ends are to generate utility. Okay, we have to mind the utility, that scientific developments are utilitarian. Okay, they have the pragmatic values in terms of the research practices in society. Okay, when we invest funding, okay, for researchers, okay, then actually we want certain good results in the researchers. Of course, all researchers are utilitarian, okay, and they want certain good results, okay, in terms of the energy, resource, time involved in the research practices. But we have to understand that good ends, they don't mean the fabricated ends, okay. Of course, we want good ends, good researchers, good developments in research practices, but we don't want the manipulated ends. We don't want the manipulated results, fabricated results, okay, falsified results, okay, because they are not adding any value other than one's career enhancement, one's promotion, one's getting benefited for the short term of period. But of course, if a researcher is not understanding what is the utility of research in ethical terms, in the terms that of course it has to maximize the goodness for society, but somehow it has to take care of the principle of beneficence, that any kind of utility that we perceive, that we project to achieve in the research practice has to incorporate the principle of beneficence first of all, and also respect the principle of non-maleficence, okay, not harming anybody. So of course our ends and utility must have ethical direction, okay. So we have to practice values, certain values, okay, right, yes, and we have to practice certain ethical principles also, okay. So these things we have to practice in the researchers, okay, and there we have to understand, of course, it's maximizing, okay, goodness, okay, for society, okay, that's all right, okay, but our ends what the ends we want to achieve, that the action is end oriented, okay, but we have to respect the means also, okay. So that's where we are going to talk about further, so how it has to respect not only ends but also means. So when we respect the means also, right, and that's where comes the idea of duty. We have to understand that in research we have certain responsibilities and we have a duty. What is the duty? The first duty of a researcher, okay, in the research practice is to follow the right methods, okay, right principles of research, okay, and that's where researcher has to respect the research design, research methods, okay, research equipments, okay, and all the research procedures, okay, by which we are supposed to produce certain results, okay, and that's why we have the duty and integrity, okay, to maintain that kind of that kind of honesty in the research process. So in that honesty we have to understand not only our researchers are directed to achieve certain results, okay, those results of course be beneficial. They may have the social benefits, commercial benefits, okay, personal benefits also, but for personal benefits or commercial benefit, okay, we cannot ignore the means we use. So the procedure, the means that we use in the researchers must take care the means, okay, the right means, okay. So right means is necessary. We must have the right means to achieve the directed ends, okay. Our end should be right and means should be right, okay. So it's of course we must value the results, we must value the utility of the researchers, but now we have realized through these case studies, okay, when we go through the history of the research, we see that how people and researchers have manipulated with the means, and in the way those manipulations in terms of means, how they have affected the ends also. So of course we have to achieve certain ends in the researchers, okay, but we have to respect the means also. And then next we have to understand the idea of virtues, okay. So of course researcher has the virtue that we have discussed, that researcher must be originality, okay. He must have the originality, he must have the integrity, he must work for the novelty in the researchers, okay. So there are certain kind of virtues, okay, that a researcher must develop and must respect in the research practice. The first virtue we can talk about is the honesty. He must be honest, okay. In terms of the researcher, he must have the honesty in his character, okay. So when we talk about the virtues, okay, the very first virtue we can talk about is in a researcher is the honesty, okay. He must or she must be honest in terms of the research conduction, in terms of the following the research methods, okay, research design, proper procedures in the research. He must have the competency, excellence in terms of conducting research, proper knowledge and merits of conducting experiments, okay. That's where virtue is really important, it has a very important criteria. And the virtue involved that virtue is always a teleological term, that a virtue has an end also to achieve, okay. So in the research, these all virtues, competency, okay, integrity, okay, knowledge, they all have the and they all have ends to achieve in the research practices. When the virtuous act will take place from the researcher, okay, when he or she understands virtue, okay, and accordingly when he or she performs a research practice, of course we see the ethical practices in research, and that's also a kind of development we must inculcate in researcher, so to avoid the ethical violations, okay. And now let's try to understand the use of this doctrine of double effect as a research strategy to develop ethics in researchers, or to understand when there is doubt in the case, okay. So we have to understand the application of this doctrine of double effect also in avoiding the ethical violations, okay, in terms of practices, okay. So of course in some research practices we see there are negative results and there are the positive results in the research experimentations, okay. So first of all, we following informed consent, we must inform about to the subject, okay, in research about the all negative results and all the positive results, okay, all the risks involved in the research and all the benefits involved in the research to the subjects of research, okay. Then we have to inform about the intention. I mean, our intention, okay, when we talk about the intention in the research, okay, our intention should be pure intention, it should be right intention. We must not have the wrong intention as a researcher to conduct a research, okay. We must have a right intention to conduct a research, okay, with a research proposal, with a research purpose, what we want to achieve in the researches. So our intention should be also right for the right action, okay. And then we can talk about this. After intention, we can talk about the means and okay, our means, okay, when we talk about the means in the research conduction, so our means also should be good, okay, as we discussed earlier, okay, in terms of duties. So when we apply the means, okay, means and ends both will be good. Of course, we have to choose, we must not choose the wrong means to achieve the right ends in the researches. That's where we can actually avoid the ethical violation. If we are concerned that let me think about my procedure, let me think about my research design, experiment and data, okay, I must take care that I'm not using any wrong means to achieve any desired results, okay, through the plagiarism or through the fabrication or through the selective reporting. These all are the wrong means, okay. And then we have to, of course, think about the proportionality of the results in terms of the risks involved in the research, okay. We have to think about the risks and we have to think about the benefits, okay. So we have to talk about the risks and benefits also in the research, okay, in terms of what are the risks involved in the research and what are the benefits involved in the research. We must have a clear-cut justification for these risks and benefits, okay, in the research again, and we must be we must clearly inform to the research subject about these all aspects of research. So applying these ethical modeling, we can train researcher and we can avoid ethical violations in the research. So let's try to understand what we have discussed in this lecture, okay. So we try to understand the idea of research community, and then we try to understand the idea of research ethics, okay. We try to understand the idea of ethical violations. We talked about the ethical principles and values like integrity, okay, honesty, and we talk about the idea of the beneficence, non-beneficence, okay, and we talk about the idea of justice also in that case, and then we discussed about the ethical violations in these practices and publication practices, okay, and then we try to analyze subject-specific case studies concerning the violations of fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, informed consent, conflict of interest, okay, and then we also discussed about some cases about the authorship and conflict of interest, okay. So we have discussed for in this lecture. Let me it's a very really important issue to talk about the ethical violations, okay. So we have developed through the whole lectures a concept of a fresh researcher, okay. So we see although that most of the experienced researchers also they commit ethical violations, and that's very proven case, okay, in the research practice, okay. But we have to understand the value of the research and publication ethics courses, okay, research guidelines and ethical regulations, and the involvement of the research ethical committees. We have to understand the values of this, okay. We need to train researcher, a fresh researcher, in terms of this ethics and principles, okay, so to avoid these ethical violations on the one hand. Secondly, it's not only following the ethical principles. We need to understand the value of the research ethics. We need to understand as well the value of principles, why we need ethics in the research, or values and principles in research, that we need to philosophically understand here. Look, that it's not something extra ethics as we need in the research practices. We need to respect the very proper code of conducts in the research practices. So what we have discussed so far, we talked about the practices through which we develop researchers. Okay, and we talked about kind of misconducts researchers commit in conduction of research. So we have to understand, when you actually commit some kind of misconduct in research practice, actually you disregard science. Okay, and that is that's a very wrong attitude of a researcher. Okay, because of science, the way it has established, okay, the methods science has evolved through in the history. Okay, the way science is adding value in the human life, especially if you see in the healthcare, okay, how science has changed the whole phenomena of the human life, how it has improvised the quality of human life. That's where we have to realize actually science has got a deep respect in the research community. And when we see such kind of ethical violations, okay, then actually we also see at the same time we observe the same time a disregard for the science, and that's where actually it can also create a serious damage to society and to the utility of the science. Okay, when we judge from the utility point of view, so we need to understand it's not only the ends are important, it's not only the results are important, it's not only the desired results are important, research publications are important. Okay, name is important, fame is important. More important is to maintain that regard of scientific practices, maintain that value of a researcher, okay, respect of researcher in the research community, and that's where we have to condemn these ethical violations. Okay, these are the worst cases. Okay, and then we have to understand that how we can avoid following these ethical strategies. These are the references scholars can go through. These references I have used to prepare this lecture. Thank you.